World Geography, East Asia, China's Economic Reform. Here are the learning objectives. 1. What are the three fundamental economic questions? 2. Compare and contrast the free enterprise and communist economic systems. 3. What methods did China use to reform the economy after Mao's death? 4. What role do state-owned enterprises play in the Chinese economy? Economic questions. 3 fundamentals. Every society has limited resources. There is no society that has enough goods and services to meet the unlimited needs and wants of all of its members. So scarcity, it forces society to answer 3 fundamental economic questions. 1. What should be produced? 2. How should it be produced? 3. Who should get it? The way that a society answers these 3 questions, that's called its economic system. Free enterprise. Investments and profits. In a free enterprise system, often called market capitalism, people own their own goods and property. They can invest their money into different methods of production, or they can invest their money into logistics, which is distribution and delivery. They invest this money in order to earn a profit. Profit, that's what remains after costs of running the businesses are paid. The 3 fundamental economic questions, they are answered by the interaction between the consumers and the producers, or the buyers and the sellers. Supply and demand. Prices in a free enterprise system, they're established by the interaction of this supply and demand. Supply refers to how much of a good producers make and sell, and demand refers to how much of a good consumers buy. This supply and demand interaction, this is the force behind the efficient allocation of resources in a free enterprise system. Limited government. There's limited government interference in the economy in the free enterprise system. The government's limited but still vital role includes these functions. They're a regulator. They provide and enforce a set of common rules. Everyone has to play by the same rules. Government enforces that. The government maintains the monetary system. They provide for the nation's defense, and they protect people's right to own private property. Also, the government will come in and break up any monopolistic companies, any companies that get too big, that they dominate the market and kind of distort the market a little bit. Communism. Capitalists. Communism is sometimes associated with the terms command economy or centrally planned economy. Communists have always believed that business owners, referred to as capitalists, that they use their wealth to take advantage of workers. Communists don't believe that capitalists or the owners really contribute much to the process of production, but they seem to gain the largest profit They gain this large profit because of the low wages that they pay to the workers. They exploit the labor. Workers' revolution. Communists believe that under capitalism, the conditions of the workers, that they get so dismal after a while, that the wages become so low, that the workers eventually rise up and overthrow the capitalists. And of course, the capitalists are the ones who control both business and government, according to communism. In its place, workers establish a system where cooperation replaces competition. And they believe, communists believe, that this allows everyone's needs to be met in the fairest manner possible. Government control. However, in reality, communism is actually an economic system in which unelected government leaders, they answer the three fundamental economic questions. The communist leadership, they control the means of production, and they also control the channels for the distribution of goods and services, the logistics. Government ownership of private property, this eliminates competition, but unfortunately, without competition, there's very little innovation because the individual doesn't really gain any money for an original idea. So why bother? In communist societies, officials usually develop 5-year national plans which set production goals for the different industries. Economic reform in China. Reform goals. After the death of Mao in 1976, China was not doing too well economically. So the new communist leadership under Deng Xiaoping, they started to introduce aspects of a free enterprise economic system. The government emphasized a few things. They wanted to raise personal income and personal consumption. Wanted people to go out and buy more, earn more and buy more. And the government also introduced new management systems in factories to help increase productivity, help make more things with less effort. The government also focused on the development of foreign trade to promote economic growth. Foreign direct investment. In 1978, the Chinese decided that they would permit foreign direct investment in China. This was a big decision for them. They would direct this foreign direct investment into what they called special economic zones, or SEZs. These zones were areas of cities that were built up usually along the Chinese coast. Efforts were made to develop a legal and provide all the other infrastructure that would be necessary to make this work. Agricultural communes. Back in Mao's day, the peasants living in the rural area, in the countryside, the farmers, they weren't allowed to own their own individual farm anymore. They had to work together on a communal farm, and they were paid wages. This wasn't really a productive use of their resources. Farms didn't really produce all the food that was necessary, so it wasn't really a very good system. So after Mao died, the Chinese officials, they broke up these agricultural communes, and they replaced it with a system of leases. And basically what this did is return individual land ownership back to the individual household. So you could own your own land again, in a way. peasants, they were allowed to lease land for a fixed period from the government, usually 99 years. They could also renew these leases. In return for this, the peasants had to provide a minimum quota of produce to the government. They had to pay for the lease with some of their grain that they might grow or some of their cotton they might grow. Any extra grain or cotton or corn, they could sell this surplus and earn a profit. State-owned enterprises. Prior to 1978, the reforms of 1978, business enterprises, they were all owned by the state. They were referred to as state-owned enterprises, or SOEs. And these state-owned enterprises, they dominated the different economic sectors of the economy, whether that was steel or the manufacture of airplanes or the manufacture of automobiles. Whatever it was, the government produced all of these things. These state-owned enterprises, they didn't answer to the voters or the individuals. They only answered to the government. They were pretty much owned by the government. If you were a smaller business, you didn't report to the national government. You would report to the municipal government, the city government, or the county government. Individual private enterprises, like a family-run business, these were allowed after 1978, but at first they were limited to a maximum of 7 employees. Function of SOE. The state-owned enterprises, they function not only as industrial units. This is pretty much kind of prior to 1978, but a little bit after 1978 as well. So they weren't just industrial units. They were also kind of almost social agencies. They were arms of the government. And so in addition to providing a job, they also provided housing to the workers, and daycare, and education, schools, healthcare. So they were both business and government. The largest state-owned enterprises, they had hundreds of thousands of employees. But really only a small proportion of the employees were actually directly engaged in the production of a good. SOE reform. Of course, what I just described, it really doesn't work out too well. If you're trying to produce steel, you shouldn't also have to run schools and provide health care and daycare. That's not really very efficient. So they started to reform the state-owned enterprise system in China. And in 2012, even though state-owned enterprises were still pretty much the backbone of the Chinese economy, at that time they were still producing about 50% of the goods and services. They were still employing over half of the workers in China. But reforms have kind of focused on splitting up these state-owned firms, making them smaller, leaner, making them more efficient, more productive, making them even compete with one another at times. And also, some of the larger enterprises, they've been privatized, although in general that's not really politically acceptable to the Communist Party. They're trying to hang on to as much power, political power and economic power as possible. China's rise. China's the world's second largest trading nation. That's significant. China's current goal is to move from the export dependency economy, where they're basically just exporting goods and making their money off that. They want to develop more of an internal consumer market where they make more of their money off of selling those goods being manufactured in China to the Chinese consumer inside the country and not to the foreigner outside of the country. Wages are definitely rising throughout China, and the standard of living is increasing. Brain drain. Many people choose to leave China. They get fed up with the corruption. They get tired of all the political uncertainties. This is an authoritarian, one-party communist state. It looks pretty modern on the outside, but there's still a lot of uncertainties there. There's still limited economic freedom, especially in a country where, many of the industries are dominated by these state-owned enterprises. So many skilled Chinese, they do leave the country in search of greater opportunities. As we've noted before, this is a brain drain. The end. Thank you for your attention.